Today we welcome Dr. Tikhon Pino to introduce his latest book. Welcome, Dr. Pino.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Could you tell us about this newest book that you have put together with Patristic Nectar?
Yeah, this is Contraception and the Orthodox Church. It's a volume that studies the issue of contraception in the history of patristic and Orthodox ethical teaching about marriage and family life. And the volume includes two encyclicals written by the bishops of the Church of Greece in 1937 and 1978, reaffirming the doctrine, the thesis of the book, that the fathers of the church have always rejected contraceptive techniques and methods for sterilizing the marital union.
What is this volume all about? What are its contents?
So the volume of the book, very simply, is an attempt to grapple with a 2,000-year Orthodox tradition stemming from the fathers of the church on the ethical issue of contraception in the marital bed. And I began this study in 2011. I myself did not have clarity on what the Orthodox Church teaches, to put it simply, about this issue. We often say that Roman Catholics forbid contraception, and there are different opinions and theories about what the Orthodox position is. And so I honestly didn't know back in 2011. I had an idea which was fairly close, but not exactly accurate. And so I undertook a basic study of the tradition and the fathers on this issue. And the results were pretty mind-blowing. What we find, not unexpectedly, is a consistent tradition surrounding the responsibilities of marriage and the ethical questions that are important for a husband and wife in living a Christian life. The basic thesis of the book is that we Orthodox claim to have a 2,000-year-old tradition, but we often approach the issue of contraception as if that tradition is null and void or irrelevant. And that's really problematic for a lot of reasons. There are myths surrounding contraception. Some people say that contraception is completely new. It's a new issue for the church, that the fathers never dealt with this. The fathers dealt with abortion and abortifacient drugs, but they never really dealt with the specific issue of contraception, which is ultimately sterilizing the marital act, rendering it infertile. But in fact, there is a long tradition about thinking about that. This is reaffirmed, as we said, by the Church of Greece in two encyclicals very nicely. And so we put that all together in this book.
You wrote a 100-page study on contraception in this volume. What is that all about? What ground do you cover?
So the study begins by looking at what people have been saying about contraception, modern ethicists, modern church leaders, and then measuring that against what the church has been saying for 2,000 years. And so we look at the status quo. We look at the received idea, basically, that Orthodox, unlike Catholics, accept contraception, sometimes with certain conditions. We often want to qualify the way that we accept contraception. But the book moves on to look at what the fathers themselves tell us about the reproductive act or the marital act in marriage in an ethical context, look at what the canonical tradition and what saints have said, and what the age-old understanding of this issue is. So we know what people are saying now, but is this a time-tested Orthodox idea, or is it simply something that has insinuated itself into our consciousness as a kind of platitude and truism?
What are these documents from the Church of Greece, and why are they important?
So the Church of Greece was dealing with demographic crises, social crises, and economic crises back in the 30s and back in the 70s. And so part of the solution that was suggested at the time was for the church to give her blessing to contraception so that families would not have to be burdened with too many children. and they would be sort of absolved from the guilt of having to deal with contraception. So contraception existed in a country like Greece, but there was an effort for the church to give its blessing, sometimes under the context of economia and sometimes not. And so the Church of Greece simply affirmed in the 30s, 1938, and in 1937 rather, and 1978, that we can't bless this, that the fathers of the church have always rejected this. The church has consistently said we don't render the active union of husband and wife infertile through artificial or non-artificial means, that this is contrary to Christian behavior.
Why are Christians so accepting of contraception?
I don't think it's a difficult question why Christians are accepting of contraception. I think that there is nothing harder than giving one's life for another, and having kids, like marriage itself, is inherently giving one's life for another. You have to lay down all of the things that you would like to do at any given moment, at any time of day, at any time of night. And if you're having lots of kids, if you're having more than two, and I should be clear that the book is not advocating for large families in and of itself. That theoretically is a separate issue. The book is asking about the act of contraception, the way that contraception takes the sexual act of man and woman, and it renders it into something that excludes fertility, excludes reproduction. And so the reason people are accepting of that culturally, but also just at a human level, is that it gives us greater access to pleasure. Pleasure at all times. We've had this, it's part of our cultural vocabulary to talk about sex without consequences. That is literally what contraception is. It provides this opportunity for sex without consequences. The consequence of responsibility, the consequence of financial burdens, possibly in the long term. These are all real things. These encyclicals of the Church of Greece, the bishops address those realities. They're aware that raising kids is hard. If you end up with a lot of kids, that's difficult. But those are not sufficient reasons. And of course, even before we get to that, there's the issue of simply not wanting to deal with it. So even where having children is not a burden, we have reasons as impassioned human beings who long for pleasure, who long to avoid pain as our basic animalistic urge, do not want to deal with the consequences of sexuality.
Why is there so much confusion on this ethical topic amongst Orthodox Christians? And why among Roman Catholics and Protestants as well?
So we've been sold this idea that the Orthodox have this exception for whatever reason. It's often couched in pastoral economia or just pastoral prudence, that unlike Catholics who have this extreme idea about contraception, which, by the way, is not necessarily followed any more than it is in the Orthodox Church, but whereas the Catholics have this idea, we have more leniency, more understanding, but it's simply a cultural idea. It's simply the zeitgeist and the spirit of the times that has infected our Orthodox understanding. Not because, and I say that not because I'm not sympathetic or the bishops haven't been sympathetic to the realities of raising children and family life, but because there simply is no warrant in the Orthodox tradition for introducing this. When people have defended this so-called Orthodox idea that we allow contraception, they have never been able to root it in the tradition in any way. At the most, what people will say is that such and such church father often gets laid at the feet of St. John Chrysostom, talk about the other side of sexuality, that husband and wife are meant to have union and meant to enjoy one another and come together in the marital bed without necessarily having kids. Of course, that's all true, that St. John Chrysostom and other saints do talk about that side of marriage, but that doesn't really get at the ethical issue about sterilizing the marital act and going out of one's way to make sure that this does not result in children. That's a separate and fine ethical issue. And so I deal with that in the book, and hopefully readers will be able to encounter all these traditional, and I say traditional, all these classic objections about why contraception is okay in the booklet, and see what the Orthodox response to these has been. And I think the end result, the end product, is a beautiful vision of marriage and marital union. Marriage is not baby making. Marital union is not just about producing large families. That's not just about making sure you have kids. The Orthodox understanding of marriage is holistic. It includes all of these things. It recognizes that there are times in which having kids is not first and foremost the intention of coming together as husband and wife. That's different from contracepting. We recognize that marriage is about a lot of spiritual goods, psychological goods, societal, social goods. None of these things give us license to sterilize. And as I often say in the book, render the sexual act infertile by some kind of intervention.
Thank you, Dr. Tikhon Pino. Where can people find this book?
We were blessed to produce this study through Patristic Nectar Publications, and it's available through their website and more broadly online, wherever you check for it, wherever you normally shop for books. And we hope, as we said, that it will provide you some answers if you're thirsty to be faithful to the Orthodox tradition. Patristic Nectar has, graciously made that available.